guys, this is the notes for chapter 4, section 1, defining the atom. So this is just talking about what is an atom. You've heard this word before. We're going to go through some specifics on who found them and just a little bit of information about them. So Democritus, he was about 2,500 years ago. He lived in the year 460 BC. He was born and he died in about 370 BC. So he was a Greek philosopher, and he thought that matter was made out of tiny particles. Now, he didn't have any kind of science to back this up. He didn't prove this. He just was hanging out thinking, as a philosopher does. And he was like, well, I know that if I take a piece of grass and I cut it in half, it's still grass. So at some point, I must not be able to cut it anymore. And he said that once you get it to that point where you can't cut it anymore, he calls those atomos, which is Greek for indivisible, meaning you can't divide them anymore. That's all well and good, but it didn't really prove anything. So it was really easy for later Greek philosophers to come up with other things that weren't actually atoms. They made up things that didn't exist. So Democritus was actually pretty close to the truth, but since he didn't really have any science to back it up, people didn't really continue to believe him. Until 1766, John Dalton was born, and then he was an English chemist and physicist, and he's considered the first person to start the true atomic modern theory. So he was the one to really prove atoms. The way he proved it is by the conservation of mass. So he noticed that whenever you have a chemical reactant, the mass of the reactants was always equal to the mass of the products. So whatever you start with, say you had 33 grams of something that you had reacting together, at the end, whatever you made was also 33 grams, or say you had 100 grams to start with, like the sum of all your reactants, then the sum of all your products is always 100 grams. So it was always the same mass. So let's say you had 50 grams of hydrogen peroxide, then that would break down to 50 total grams if you added up the mass of the water and the oxygen. And he was like, oh my gosh, well, if the mass never changes, therefore the matter must be kept the same at some level, and it's just reorganized after the chemical reactions. So he figured if the matter was being reorganized, it had to be in little pieces that were remaking bonds and making new things out of the old stuff. So here are the things he figured out by that. He said matter is made of extremely small particles, and he called them atoms. So here we are, a picture of a whole bunch of different atoms, right? We've got oxygen and hydrogen. This is water made out of hydrogen and oxygen. This is hydrogen peroxide made out of 2 hydrogens and 2 oxygens. He also said atoms are indivisible and indestructible. So you can't break up an atom, okay? That's what Dalton thought. He also said that atoms of a given element are identical in size, mass, and chemical properties. He was pretty darn close there. Later in the chapter, we're going to learn that there can be some differences within the same element, but pretty much an oxygen atom is an oxygen atom is an oxygen atom, right? So each element has atoms that make it up, and they're going to have their own properties that are totally different from any other atom of any other element. All right, he also said atoms of a specific element are different from those of another element, right? So like I just said, oxygen is different from hydrogen, which is different from carbon. Okay, he said that atoms combine in whole number ratios to form compounds. So that's what we're seeing here. See how H2O, there's no fraction of a hydrogen, there's no fraction of an oxygen, because he also said that atoms can't be broken down any further. So it has to be whole number ratios. Whole numbers are counting numbers. Also, H2O is always water, no matter where you find it. We learned that back in the last unit when we talked about compounds. They have specific ratios. Versus if you have H2O2, now you have hydrogen peroxide. Right? This is good to drink. Water's good. This is bad. Hydrogen peroxide, if you drink it, you'd die. There's an old joke that says 2 chemists went into a bar. One orders, oh, I think I'll have an H2O. That's water. And the other says, that sounds really good. I'll have an H2O too. They both drink it. The second one dies. Anyways, hope you're laughing now. All right, in a chemical reaction, atoms are separated, combined, and rearranged. So if we have these reacting to form these, notice they combine, right? You can have hydrogen peroxide is going to react and it's going to form water and then some leftover oxygens. So the bonds actually break, atoms move around, and they reform in different ratios. Okay, so what is an atom? So this is jumping ahead a bit to what we know now, a little bit of information. So these are the simplest part of an element that retains all the properties of an element. So atoms are so incredibly small. Like, they're so small that we can't fully wrap our heads around how small an atom is. Like, the human brain doesn't actually really have the capacity to understand. We can talk about it, but like, I can't really fathom how small they are. So if you took one single grain of sand, just one little piece, then that has 3 times 10 to the 22nd atoms in it, in one grain. And what is 3 times 10 to the 22nd? Well, it's equal to this number. This number, 300000, I don't even know that number, like how to say it. It's way past my vocabulary. That's how many atoms are in a teeny tiny grain of sand. A grain of sand can break into this many things. That's insane. Okay, atoms can be viewed, so this is very modern, a new advance in science. Atoms can be viewed by a scanning tunneling microscope. Now, they just look like this up here, right? So you can just see the outline. When you use a scanning tunneling microscope, you're covering the surface of whatever you're interested in metal, and you're using electrons to just scan the outside. That's why it's called a scanning microscope. So it just shows the shape of the outside, and that's actually what we can see. So these are different atoms lined up, which is really freaking awesome. Okay, all things are made out of atoms. And since you're a thing, you're made out of atoms. Now, I know in biology, you're like, oh, I'm made out of cells. Cool. Cells are made out of atoms. So we're talking a smaller scale than what you learned about as the basic unit of life. So let's say this is you. You're made out of cells. So you, in your body, you have more cells than there are stars in the entire galaxies, all the galaxies we know about. That's how many cells are in your body. Each one of those cells breaks down even further into organelles. So let's look at the nucleus, the center of the cell. In the nucleus, we have these things called chromosomes. And then in the chromosomes are DNA. DNA is made out of base pairs. So now I want to just talk about these things right here. You've got cytosine, guanine, thymine, adenine. Okay, you've got 4 types of base pairs. Out of those base pairs, the smallest one is cytosine. So each cell has 3 million DNA bases, but I want to just pretend they all have cytosine because that's the smallest one. Cytosine has 11 atoms in it. Since there's over 3 billion DNA bases in one cell in your body, now keep in mind, you have more cells than there are stars in all the galaxies. You have an insane amount of cells. We're just talking about inside one. If you were to list out all the bases in one cell of your body, just like A, T, C, 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 just listing them by letter, not even the number of atoms, then that list would take up 30 textbooks with no pictures. 30 textbooks. That's how many bases there are. Each of those bases has over 11 atoms. The smallest one has 11 atoms. So there are over 33 billion atoms in just the DNA in one cell. That's how small atoms are. And that's what we're going to be learning about this year. And specifically in this unit, we're going to talk about the basics of an atom. So we're going to be talking about the basics of something that is so incredibly small. You can't even fathom how many there are in your body. That's crazy, but it's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun. Okay, so that is it for the notes for 4.1. Good luck on this section, and I will see you in the next video.